I never thought I'd live to see the day when my husband, the man I trusted with my life, the man who held me at the altar and vowed forever, would become the person I feared most. That night, lying in bed, I could feel the bitterness of betrayal curl in my chest as I listened to the soft creak of the bedroom door. My husband thought I was gone, thought the drug he slipped into my drink had done its work, but he had no idea I'd spat it out when he wasn't looking. No idea that I was lying there wide awake, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting to see what he would do. And when I saw it, when my eyes cracked open just enough to glimpse what he held in his hand, my entire world shattered into pieces. It wasn't just what he was carrying, it was the look on his face. As if I wasn't his wife anymore but a stranger he wanted out of his way. The man I had built my life with stood at the foot of my bed, staring at me with an expression that belonged to someone I didn't recognize. My throat tightened and for a second I almost gasped, almost gave myself away. But I forced my body to remain still, to stay limp, as if the poison he poured into my glass had taken me down. Before I take you through what happened next, let me introduce myself. My name is Clara and I've been married to my husband, Jason, for 6 years. We met like any cliché romance story. You know, the kind where the girl isn't looking for love and suddenly a man swoops in, sweeps her off her feet and makes her believe in forever. That was Jason for me. Or at least that's who I thought he was. But as I would come to learn, the man I married wasn't the man I thought he was at all. Before I continue this story, please tell me in the comments section where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means more than you know. It helps us keep sharing these stories with you. Now back to that night. I could hear every movement Jason made as he crept closer to the bed. The sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floor, the way his breath grew heavier the nearer he came. My chest felt tight with fear, but I forced myself to breathe slow and steady, mimicking the rhythm of someone who was deeply asleep. I didn't know what he was planning. I didn't know if he wanted to rob me of something, hurt me, or worse. But the way he stood over me, his shadow swallowing the moonlight spilling in from the window, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't love. I remembered the drink he handed me earlier, how his eyes flickered nervously when I raised it to my lips. It was just wine, or so he said, but something about the way he kept watching me made me suspicious. So I faked a sip, letting the liquid touch my lips before tilting my head back as though I swallowed. I excused myself to the bathroom, spat it into the sink, and rinsed quickly before returning to the living room. Jason smiled at me then, that crooked grin that once made me melt, but that night it chilled me to the bone. And now here I was, lying in bed pretending to be under his spell, while he loomed over me with an intent I couldn't yet piece together. My body screamed at me to run, to scream, to fight, but my mind told me one thing: wait. Watch. Find out what he's really after. When he leaned down closer, I caught the faint scent of something metallic and my stomach dropped. His hand brushed the blanket near my side, and in that instant, I saw the object he had been hiding. I froze. The room spun around me as realization set in. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me overthinking. My husband had every intention of making sure I never woke up again. But Jason didn't know me as well as he thought. He believed I was asleep, helpless, unaware. He didn't know I was watching his every move. He didn't know I was already piecing together the puzzle of betrayal, greed, and secrets that had brought us to this very moment. Because the truth was, Jason had been planning this for a long time. And I was about to find out why. They say hindsight is 20/20, but when you're living inside the storm, it's hard to see the warning clouds gathering above you. Looking back now, I realized the cracks in my marriage had been there for years. I just chose to paint over them, telling myself it was normal, that every couple had issues, that love meant forgiveness and patience. But the truth? Love had blinded me. Jason was perfect in the beginning. Charming, attentive, the kind of man who seemed to know what I wanted before I even said it. He opened doors for me, sent flowers to my office, whisked me away on spontaneous weekend trips. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. My friends used to joke that I had hit the jackpot, and I believed them. I wore my love like armor, convinced nothing could ever pierce it. But perfection is a mask, and masks always slip. The first time I noticed something off, it was small. We were at dinner with friends and someone made a joke about money. Jason's laugh was a beat too forced, his eyes a shade too calculating. I brushed it off. He hated when people pried into finances, that's all. But then I started noticing how tight his jaw became whenever bills were mentioned, or how quickly he changed the subject when I asked about his work. He was successful, or so he said, but I realized I knew shockingly little about how his success actually came about. Then there were the late nights. At first I didn't mind. He was ambitious, hardworking. That's what he told me anyway. But ambition leaves traces. Emails, calls, exhaustion. With Jason there was nothing. No tired eyes, no phone buzzing with late-night messages, no trace of the job that supposedly kept him out until dawn. Just silence and vague excuses. I told myself not to nag. Wives who nag drive their husbands away, right? That's what society teaches us. So I swallowed my unease and smiled when he came home late, acting as if I hadn't been staring at the clock for hours. But there were other things too. Strange things. Like the time he insisted on handling all of our accounts. "You don't need to worry about that, Clara," he told me with a gentle smile, sliding the checkbook out of my hands. "I want you to feel cared for. Protected." Sounded sweet then, like chivalry. Now I know it was control. Or the way he bristled when I asked about life insurance. We were still young, but it was a practical question, one I thought any couple would discuss. His reaction was swift. Too swift. He laughed it off at first, but then his voice hardened, sharp edges hidden behind that same easy smile. "Why are you thinking about death already? Are you planning something I should know about?" It unsettled me, but again I smoothed it over. That was my greatest flaw. I smoothed everything over. Because when you're in love, you don't want to believe the person lying beside you in bed could ever hurt you. The biggest red flag came a year ago when Jason surprised me with a gift. He insisted on transferring our house deed into both of our names, saying it was only fair. At the time I thought it was romantic. A gesture of commitment. But when I think back, I remember how insistent he was, how he pushed me to sign without giving me time to read the documents fully. His charm was a shield and I let it blind me to the fine print. Slowly, Jason's charm began to feel rehearsed. Like he was playing a role he had perfected. The man who adored me in public was not the same man who looked at me in private when he thought I wasn't watching. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me with an expression I couldn't name, cold, detached, almost calculating. The kind of look that made me want to pull my robe tighter around me even in broad daylight. And then came the accidents. The brakes on my car failing on a rainy night. A fire alarm going off in our house when I was alone. The source traced back to faulty wiring Jason had been fixing. The loose railing on the balcony he'd promised he would secure. I told myself I was clumsy, that bad luck followed me. But somewhere deep down my instincts were screaming. I ignored them. I wanted so badly to believe in us. To believe in the man who once held me so tenderly, who whispered promises of forever against my skin. But forever, I would come to learn, wasn't what Jason had in mind. The night he handed me that glass of wine, I should have known. The way his eyes lingered on me, almost too intently, as if he was waiting for something. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. When the liquid touched my lips, something inside me whispered, "Don't." And for once I listened. I let it slip past my mouth into the sink later when he wasn't watching, all the while pretending nothing was wrong. That decision, small, cautious, instinctive, saved my life. Because it wasn't just paranoia. Jason was planning something. Something bigger, darker, more dangerous than I could imagine. And it all began long before the night he stood at my bedside. The rest of that night felt like an endless, twisted play where I was both actor and audience, trying not to break character. My heart thumped so loudly I was terrified he might hear it. Yet I forced myself to remain still under the covers, my breath slow and even, my body heavy like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Every instinct screamed at me to leap up, scream, confront him, run. But I knew that the moment I revealed I was awake, the game would be over. And I needed to see. I needed to know exactly what he had planned for me. Minutes ticked by, stretched into an eternity. Then, with a deliberate calm that sent a shiver crawling down my spine, I heard the sound of his footsteps returning. My husband. The man I had once trusted with my life, with my future, with my dreams. The man who had slipped something into my drink. He hovered near me again, and this time I cracked my eyes open just enough to see through the veil of lashes. The sight nearly made me bolt upright. In his hand he held his phone, the glow illuminating his face in the dark. His expression wasn't that of a worried husband watching over his sleeping wife. It was cold, calculating, like someone studying a problem he was preparing to solve. I strained my ears and then I caught it, his voice. Low, hushed but unmistakable. He was talking to someone. "She should be out for the night," he whispered, glancing toward me as if confirming my unconsciousness. "No, she didn't notice. Tomorrow we'll talk about the money." My stomach dropped. "Money? What money?" He moved closer, almost to my bedside. "By next week it'll all be transferred. Don't worry. She won't suspect a thing." It was like ice water poured straight into my veins. I understood in fragments what I was hearing. He wasn't just slipping something into my drink to play some cruel prank. He wasn't doing this out of some twisted intimacy. He was laying the groundwork for something far worse. Something involving my safety, my life, and his access to what I owned. I remembered then the bank accounts, the savings, the inheritance I had received after my father passed. Money I had been too trusting to protect. I had merged some of it into our joint account, believing we were building a future together. And now here was the man I loved, whispering in the dark about taking it all behind my back. I wanted to cry, to scream, to leap out of bed and claw at him until he admitted everything. But instead I kept still, willing my body to remain heavy, pliant, convincing. Because now I knew, if he was willing to drug me, if he was willing to plot against me, then it was no longer about betrayal alone. It was about survival. At last he slipped out of the room again. I heard the faint click of the door and then his footsteps faded down the hall. The silence that followed was suffocating. I lay there, my mind racing in circles, trying to piece together the nightmare that had become my marriage. And somewhere deep inside something began to change. The woman who had entered this marriage with open eyes and a trusting heart began to harden. A new voice whispered within me, sharper than grief, stronger than fear. A voice that said, "If he's playing a game with me, then I'll play it better. If he's plotting behind my back, then I'll stay one step ahead." That night I didn't sleep. Not a second. I waited until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains before I dared to move. Every muscle in my body ached from the stiffness of pretending to sleep, but I knew this was only the beginning. For breakfast I wore a mask. I greeted him like nothing was wrong, thanked him for making the coffee, kissed his cheek as though I hadn't seen him try to destroy me the night before. And he smiled back so easily, so casually that for a moment I almost wondered if I had dreamed the whole thing. But then I remembered the chill of his whisper, the certainty in his voice when he spoke of money, and the memory steeled me again. I knew I had to gather evidence. I had to understand exactly what he was planning before I made my move. Confronting him without proof would be like walking into a trap, and I had already seen how carefully he set them. So I played my role as the doting wife, the oblivious partner. I let him believe he was winning while every day I began to watch more closely. I checked his phone when he showered, memorized his late-night calls, noted the emails he tried to delete. Each discovery made the puzzle clearer, darker. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just betrayal. He had been planning this for months, slowly maneuvering my inheritance into his reach. And the substance in my drink? That was just one step in his larger plan, to keep me compliant, silent, and eventually powerless. But he had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. Because I wasn't asleep. And I wasn't blind. And soon he was going to learn what it meant to betray a woman who had nothing left to lose. That night after my husband left the house, I sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, completely numb. My body felt like it wasn't even mine anymore. The man I had trusted with my life, the man I vowed to love and grow old with, had just tried to put me to sleep permanently, or at the very least make me too weak to fight back. I didn't know which was worse, that he wanted to harm me, or that he could so casually walk out afterwards, like it was just another day. When the morning came, I pretended nothing happened. I smiled at him across the kitchen, even kissed his cheek while inside every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. But I had made up my mind. Running would only give him power. Staying meant I could collect evidence, plan, and make sure that when he went down he would never recover from it. So I began my little game. The first thing I did was install a small camera in our bedroom. Nothing obvious, just a tiny one I bought online that looked like a USB charger. I also placed one in the kitchen, facing the cabinets where he always prepared drinks. Then I bought a second phone, one he didn't know about, and synced the cameras to it. Every night, I made sure to drink whatever he handed me, and every night, I dumped it down the sink the moment he looked away. For weeks, I pretended to get sleepier and more fatigued. I wanted him to believe his plan was working. The more confident he felt, the sloppier he would get. And oh, did he get sloppy. One night, I caught him on camera carefully pouring something from a small, unlabeled bottle into my glass of wine. Another night, he stood over me for almost 5 minutes, just staring, whispering things under his breath. It made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stay still, to keep breathing slow and steady like I was deeply asleep. I wanted to scream. I wanted to get up and smash that bottle against the wall and demand to know why. But I knew better. If I confronted him without proof, he'd twist it back on me, make me look paranoid or unstable. And if he really was dangerous, then showing my cards too early could push him to do something even worse. So I kept playing the role of the naive, clueless wife, while inside I was documenting every single move he made. During the day, I started noticing other things too. Money missing from our joint account. Phone calls he would take outside, lowering his voice like he didn't want me to hear. Late nights out, always with vague excuses that didn't add up. Slowly, the picture came together. Not only was he trying to get rid of me, but he had someone else. The betrayal hit me harder than anything. Poisoning me was monstrous enough, but doing it for another woman? That was beyond unforgivable. My heart ached, but my anger burned hotter than my grief. I started to shadow him quietly, tracking his movements. One Friday night, when he said he was working late, I followed him. He didn't go to the office. Instead, he pulled into the driveway of a house I'd never seen before. And then I saw her, a woman younger, with her arms already outstretched to greet him. They kissed right there in the doorway like two people who didn't have a care in the world. In that moment, standing across the street in the shadows, I felt like my entire marriage had been a cruel joke. All the dinners I cooked, all the sacrifices I made, the loyalty I gave, none of it mattered. He had chosen her. And worse, he had chosen to erase me in the process. But I didn't cry that night. I didn't collapse. I didn't confront him. Instead, I walked back to my car with a cold determination I had never felt before. Because now I had all the pieces I needed. His affair. His attempt to poison me. His lies. It was no longer about just surviving. It was about revenge. And I promised myself one thing as I drove home with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. He would never see me coming. From that night onward, something inside me hardened. I stopped thinking like a betrayed wife and started thinking like a strategist. If he was ruthless enough to try to erase me, then I had to be ruthless enough to destroy him, piece by piece. The first step was evidence. Real, undeniable evidence that would not only expose him but bury him legally and socially. The videos I had already collected were damning, but I needed more. Something that would make it impossible for him to wriggle out of. So I made myself his shadow. Every time he poured me a drink, I caught it on camera. Every time he whispered over the phone late at night, I recorded it. I even managed to slip into his secret drawer in the study one morning while he was showering. That's where I found it. The small amber bottle with the unmarked label, the same one I'd seen in his hands on camera. I didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, I took pictures from every angle, even the faint residue left on the cap. That was enough for the lab I secretly reached out to. A sympathetic technician who owed a favor to a friend of mine agreed to test it quietly. The results came back within days. Traces of a sedative strong enough to knock me unconscious for hours, even dangerous in high doses. My hands trembled when I read the report, but this time it wasn't fear, it was rage. Step 2 was financial. I began digging into our joint accounts, the ones he thought I never checked. That's when I discovered the withdrawals. Large ones, always just under the threshold that would trigger bank alerts. And guess where the money was going? Straight into a hidden account with her name linked to it. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to replace me, build a new life with her using our money. I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled. Because every transaction, every receipt, was another nail in his coffin. Step 3 was personal. If he thought I was weak, I wanted him to keep thinking that. So I played my role perfectly. I acted more tired, more distracted, even let my hair and makeup slip to sell the illusion of a wife who was fading away. He didn't notice the fire in my eyes when he wasn't looking. He only saw what I wanted him to see. And then came the night I decided to flip the game. I pretended to take the drink he gave me the way I always did. But this time, instead of pouring it down the sink, I poured it into a small vial and sealed it in a bag. Later, I slipped it into my purse and replaced it with plain water. That drink would be my final weapon, the proof in liquid form. But the real twist? He wasn't as careful as he thought. A few nights later, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him whisper into the phone again. This time, his words were crystal clear. "It'll be soon. She's barely holding on. Just a little more and then I'll be free." My stomach dropped. He wasn't just poisoning me slowly, he was waiting for me to collapse entirely. He wanted a body, not a divorce. I couldn't wait any longer. The very next morning I made my move. I walked into the police station with my hidden phone, my videos, the lab results, the financial documents, and the vial of his special drink. The detective who listened barely blinked at first, until I played the footage of him pouring the liquid into my glass. Then their face went stone cold. But here's the part one didn't expect. When the detective ran his name through their system, something popped up. He wasn't just a cheating husband with a poisoning habit. He already had a sealed record. Years ago, in another city, a previous partner of his had died under suspicious circumstances. Case closed due to lack of evidence. I felt my knees weaken as the detective looked me dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, if you hadn't come forward when you did, you might not be alive in a week." I walked out of that station shaking but also burning with a new kind of fire. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about survival. About justice. About making sure he never hurt anyone else again. And that night, when he came home whistling like nothing was wrong, I smiled at him sweetly. Because I knew, any day now, the trap would snap shut around him. The days after my visit to the police were the longest of my life. Every morning I woke up wondering if today would be the day he was taken away. Every night I forced myself to smile and laugh, playing the perfect wife while secretly listening for footsteps at the door that weren't his. He had no idea. He strutted around the house as if he had already won, humming while he poured my drinks, whistling when he came back late at night with her scent clinging to him. He didn't notice that I no longer drank. He didn't notice that I was memorizing every detail of his routines, every weakness in his armor. But then came the evening when everything snapped into place. He handed me a glass of wine as usual, his eyes glittering with that false tenderness. I held it between my fingers, swirled it gently, and then looked up at him with a smile so calm it made him uneasy. "You've been working so hard lately," I said softly. "You deserve a break. Why don't you take the first sip tonight?" For a split second, I saw panic flash across his face before he smoothed it away with a laugh. "You know I don't drink during the week," he replied. But his hand twitched. His mask was slipping. That's when the knock came at the door. Loud. Authoritative. He froze. I set the glass down carefully, my pulse thundering in my ears. The knock came again, sharper this time, followed by a voice. "Police. Open up." The color drained from his face. He turned to me slowly, suspicion dawning in his eyes. And for the first time in months, I didn't hide. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye and whispered, "Checkmate." What happened next felt like slow motion. He lunged toward me, fury breaking through his facade, but before he could even touch me, the door burst open. Officers swarmed in, shouting commands, weapons drawn. He was dragged back, thrashing, his curses filling the room as his wrists were forced into steel cuffs. I stood there, shaking but unbroken as they read him his rights. And then, like a final twist of the knife, the lead detective pulled a file from his coat and handed it to me. "We had to dig deeper after your evidence," he said quietly. "Turns out your husband has been under suspicion before. You weren't his first victim, but you will be his last." My blood ran cold. Not his first. How many women before me? How many lives had he stolen, smiling, charming, deceiving? They hauled him out of the house, his eyes never leaving mine, filled with venom and a promise of vengeance he'd never be able to fulfill. The door slammed shut behind them, and just like that, the silence returned. But it wasn't the silence of dread anymore. It was the silence of freedom. Still, as I sank into the couch, the weight of everything pressed down on me. I had survived. I had outplayed him. I had torn off his mask for the world to see. Yet one thought kept gnawing at me. If he wasn't the first, how many more like him are still out there, smiling across dinner tables, pouring drinks, waiting for the right moment to strike? The story was over for him. But for me, it was only the beginning. If this story gripped you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And make sure to subscribe with the bell on, because new twisted, powerful stories drop every single day. You don't want to miss what's coming next.